Hello again everyone, still making our way through this clown decade, and in today's video we are going to be talking about polyamorous relationships, for good reason. Because it appears to be a type of relationship that more and more people are trying to get into, and all it seems to do is destroy people. The best example off the top of my head that I can think of is a live YouTube interview, or I think it was done on Twitch, between psychologist Dr. K and Destiny's girlfriend Melina, and at least at the time, about a year and a half ago, they were in an open relationship, or they referred to it as a polyamorous relationship. And throughout this video, Dr. K is just probing Melina, trying to get her to say how she feels on the matter of her relationship with Destiny. And she is basically just full of jealousy, full of sadness that basically she gets to share Destiny with other women. And as you can see from this picture, basically the whole interview she is just crying because it's quite an upsetting subject, I imagine. And generally, Dr. K's advice to her is basically, don't keep feelings to yourself, let your partner know how you feel about these things, as you've let me know that basically she's not particularly happy with it. It's a very roundabout way, it seems, to try and get Melina and Destiny to either split up because it's not working, or a lot more likely try and keep it monogamous. What has happened since then with that couple, I have absolutely no idea. I don't pay attention to their private lives. But I did find it a rather revealing watch, and I mean, I've always been of the opinion that polyamorous and open relationships never work. So I'm kind of wondering why so many people do it, especially because if we go over to Reddit r/polyamorous, even just the top 3 posts make it seem like the worst decision you can make. So there's a mega thread that's about a week old that is basically just advertising, hey, all you new couples coming over here, here's some advice on if you're looking for a third person to get into your relationship. So that seems to be the first type of person in these forums, the type of person that's thinking about becoming polyamorous for whatever reason. The next type of post you tend to see is a rant post about someone in the poly relationship getting jealous, not being able to keep the relationship open and things like that, and basically having a bitch fit about it. Because that's what humans are like. Humans are a very jealous creature, especially when it comes to love. And because of this, the last type of post I tend to see on here is basically memes about people's mental health. In this case, it's a meme about this particular user not being able to find the perfect partner, so is performing some self-love, I suppose, but why are you posting that on a poly forum? I don't know. But from people I do know who were in polyamorous relationships, from uni and elsewhere, yeah, they just never seem to work, and a big factor that seems to play into it is basically mental health. They tend to be depressed, anxious people who seem to have got themselves in the mindset that the more people that love you on your terms, the better you will feel. But it always seems to just end up going into polyamorous relationships with massive freaks, basically, who were, let's say, into some freaky stuff when it came to the bedroom, because from what I can also tell about polyamorous relationships, it's never really about love. It seems almost to be trying to play into a fetish, no matter what that fetish is, because a lot of people I know, I mean, for an example, my friends at uni, you know, in a poly relationship with one of the guys, he couldn't get hard unless she spat in his mouth. Sorry for those of you that didn't want to come here and listen to that sort of thing, but basically, we were talking about leftists and their personal relationships. Of course it's going to get disgusting. And while we're still talking about polyamorous relationships, just in general that I've known, they never really seem to last more than a few months. Luckily now, pretty much everyone I know who dabbled in polyamorous relationships generally agree that they don't work, which is ideal. But before I get into the main subject of this video, I do want to quickly go through a really funny Reddit post I did find on the r/polyamorous, because it is like sexual deviants complaining about other sexual deviants there, and I just find it delicious to read. So obviously a leftist wrote it, so it's not to the point and just a load of waffle, but I just love it. So it's a vent post. Why do they do this? And long story short, basically, this person who was born female now sees herself as non-binary and puts that in her dating profile. And what I love about this is that, you know, she says she's on dating apps, and every time she sees a couple in a dating profile, they always say, basically, we want a bisexual woman to be our third, basically. And in the poly world, because they need to label everything, they call those types of people unicorn hunters, because there aren't that many bisexual women that are willing to do that. But there's a few things I just love about this. Just in the first paragraph she says, oh, I'm back on dating apps. I'm not really looking to date anyone, I just want to hang out with people. So I don't know why the hell you'd be on a dating app if you're not looking to date people and instead hang out with them. It's a stupid thing to do. Secondly, she complains that basically no one reads her profile, in which she says no couples, no unicorn hunters, and also I'm non-binary. And she's complaining that people look at her face, assume she's a woman, match with her, and then say, hey, you want to be our unicorn? Do you really think a sexually deviant couple that are looking for a threesome are really going to care about your personality? They're just looking for a good time. They really don't care if you don't see yourself as a woman. But also, I don't know what these people expect when they tear down every single boundary when it comes to gender, sex, sexuality, and things like that. It's like they want their cake and eat it. They want to be respected, have their own boundaries, and at the same time, tear all of society's boundaries on sex and sexuality and things like that. You can't have it both ways. But anyway, I'm done laughing at Reddit now. Don't worry, we're gonna get into why I'm making this video today. So the Times of all newspapers put out this article, a special report that said, the rise of polyamory, sex parties, thruples and open relationships. The pandemic has aroused a wave of sexual exploration, Laura Pullman reports. Just a warning, things are going to get very, very degenerate very, very quickly. Let's go. Entering our mid-30s, my friends broadly divide into three camps. Those with young children having precious little sex, those trying for children having precisely timed sex, and those putting off children having progressively wilder sex. Obviously, I'm fascinated by the last group, dabbling in open relationships, threesomes, masked orgies in a Mayfair mansion. Yes, yes, yes. Why? Other than to be an awful degenerate, why? Look, I get it, sex is enjoyable. Why is sex with masked strangers enjoyable? Why demean sex like this? It should, and for best results, keep it to a single person that you love. Hence, it's a good idea to keep it to someone you are married to, but failing that, someone you're at least committed to. But these people, nah, I can't do that. I need to be a sexual deviant. Now anytime I sleep with anyone, I'm like, spank me, says my friend Hannah, firmly in Camp 3, over a bottle of red in a London pub, nestled among Soho's pawn shops, strip clubs and first date bars. I'm just a lot more like, this is what I want, and this is how I want to be having sex. Sex, sex, sex on the mind. I don't know if this article is going to go into it, but I imagine if we were to have kind of a 5 years in the future, let's look back on all these friends I'm talking about type of situation, I wonder who's going to come out the most happy. Because in our first two, where basically people are making young families, they're probably going to be a lot happier in a few years than these people who are just sexual deviants who are probably going to destroy all relationships they try and create. Because if you take love out of sex, then basically all you have is a meaningless rush of endorphins every now and then. It's almost like it's an addiction, and addictions don't tend to make people happy. What makes people happy is either building foundations or building upon foundations of a strong relationship. Hence, the other two categories are probably going to be a lot happier because they are building up a family from a strong relationship they've made in the first place. That third type, with this woman drinking, I mean, it's just the perfect stereotype. Red wine, pubs, pawn shops all around. Then before you know it, she's just like that New Yorker front cover from about a year ago, you know. The one that's up on screen now, the one with the woman sitting alone drinking on Skype or Zoom or whatever she's on. In a room that is just a massive mess with a little kitten. Whether she knows it or not, this is basically the type of life that she is heading directly towards. And don't get me wrong, it is awful for men too to get into poly relationships. I'm not just having a go at women here. Good lord, how is this for degeneracy? Field, which launched in 2014 and was originally called Thrinder, until the rival matchmaking app Tinder sued, has made her more adventurous. When you're texting people on the app, they ask you what you're into, so you have to think about it and write it down. That processing of those thoughts starts fermenting stuff. She wonders whether watching more porn throughout lonely lockdowns also shifted her mindset. Oh no. Maybe that's why I'm more open to trying new things, threesomes, sex parties, kink, that I wouldn't have done before. Recently she's enjoyed a booze-fueled ménage à trois, I don't know French, with an old friend and his girlfriend. We're lucky it worked out, but it felt wise to stop there before it turned into something more complicated. See what I mean? You can maybe get away with doing that once, especially when drunk, because odds are, if it's booze-fueled, they don't really remember it anyway. But I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years' time, those two are no longer together. Free from our anxiety-ridden, man-pleasing, often sexually performative 20s, Hannah and I agree that our 30s are a prime time for deeper exploration of our sexuality. We've got confidence and self-assurance, Hannah says. Plus, we've had the pandemic, which has stunted growth in so many ways. I feel I need to make up for that. This is it. I feel fulfilled with meaningless sex with strangers. It makes it sound like they've never actually had fully committed relationships. They're describing sex in their 20s as man-pleasing. Oh, it's full of anxiety. Oh, we're just performing. The idea of sex with a life partner is that you explore together. You find out what you both like. You experiment sometimes as well. Because ultimately, sex is almost to the side. It's a byproduct of being in a relationship. It's also really good for you. And ironically enough, they are probably trying to get into threesomes with strangers and things like that as a result of poor mental health issues. Because I'm not being funny, but in your private life, if all you can think about is sex, you are an addict. Whether you're a man or a woman. And that's not a good place to be in. Over the past month, the more I've grilled my wider social circle, the more I've discovered how my outwardly straight-laced friends are ripping up the monogamy rulebook and delving into saucier fantasies. Couples who've been together since university are blowing hundreds on latex and lingerie for sex parties, such as Torture Garden, a fetish nightclub, and Killing Kittens, a members-only event where tickets for couples typically cost around £220. Or they're swiping through dating apps to find a third to join them between the sheets. Just degenerate. This sounds awful. And the picture they included as well, which I really hope I can get away with on YouTube, that is a picture, heavily edited, from Killing Kittens. And it, honestly, just with the lighting and all that, it looks like one of Dante's circles of hell. And this is another thing with polyamorous relationships, that it seems to coincide directly with BDSM. Which, of course, has this stereotype, which, true or not, I don't know, but has this stereotype that people who join in with BDSM, again, have pretty poor mental health issues. And this article only gets worse and worse, so although the much-discussed COVID baby boom never materialised, the birth rate in England and Wales dropped last year. Being stuck inside our homes for so long inevitably affected our sex lives, libidos and desires. After an initial surge in people watching porn early on in the lockdown, life became too stressful during the darkest days of the crisis to be horny, explains Kate Lister, author of The Curious History of Sex. People's libido seemed to drop, and that's quite consistent with mass horrendous events, she says. You can call them crises. But what we've also seen is that following these type of events, the Spanish flu, First World War, and the Black Death in the Middle Ages, they do seem to be marked by a renewed enthusiasm for life is short, let's have some fun. And sure, I can understand that. A lot of things in culture and, well, people's attitudes do change in times of crises and after. It's a near universal rule that in pandemics, people do tend towards preferring authoritarianism. Oh, look at that. Wouldn't you look out the window and see what the governments of the world are doing? But anyway, we're not here to talk about that. Death and sex are closely entwined in the human psyche. Okay. Threats of death tend to push people towards celebrating life, and one of the ways you do that is to shag, and do lots of it, Lister says. Yeah, but you don't have to shag random and copious amounts of people. You don't need to have a high body count. Not only on a biological level of we must keep the human race going, that's true, but also it's a stress relief, a distraction, the antithesis of what we're fearing happening. Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Our minds say we need to have sex, and the reason for that is partly due to pleasure, but it's also just a basic biological instinct because it keeps the human race going. So now we've actually got the link between sex and new life here. And we even, well, according to this history of sex author, this Lister person, she even acknowledges that, but polyamory to me, and any sort of open relationship, is trying to completely get rid of the new life part of, or the baby part of sex as much as they can. Such carnal carpe diem behaviour has occurred throughout human history. In the First World War, more soldiers were treated for venereal disease than any other ailment, with the exception of the Spanish flu. It's true. They were just like, oh, sod it, let's go and have a good time. Well, they did also think they were going to die. Says Lister, an academic who runs Halls of Yore, an online archive of historical sexuality. There are records of religious leaders denouncing shaggers, sinning in the open, and having mass orgies during the plague-hit Middle Ages, she adds. And again, when the death rate of whatever crisis you're going through is above 1%, I can, imagine that happening. Especially when, 1 in 3 people died? But we're nowhere near that type of pandemic in the current one. And don't get me wrong, people have died from coronavirus and things like that. It is an issue we should be taking seriously, and are taking seriously. But it's not the Black Death, it's not the First World War, it's none of this. But people think it is, and you couldn't blame that on propaganda, you can blame that on whatever you want. But I think what you can't do is compare it to previous pandemics, such as the Black Death. But there we go. But basically this is, to me, all a bit of a cope for their sexual deviancy. So, people with sexual deviance in the past, therefore it's okay if we do it now. That is just a horrible, horrible reasoning. We are literally being told there, oh, it was a coping mechanism. Yeah, that doesn't mean it's good. Anyway, next the author goes into her night at one of these swingers parties. So, there's always a difference between what people claim they get up to and what they actually do get up to. How much of it is just talk? On a bitingly cold Saturday last month, ever the diligent researcher, I attended a Killing Kittens mansion party. Arriving at 9:15 in my sexiest Zara dress, after a stiffener to calm my jitters, I joined hundreds of horny masked partygoers in a sprawling Knightsbridge townhouse. The next few hours were a whirl of erotic performers, espresso martinis, small talk with polycurious strangers, and watching women strapped to what looks like a torture device having their lingerie-clad bottoms whipped by smartly suited male dominatrix. And apparently, like, this is a picture of her, that's the sexiest outfit she could get from Zara. I'm just saying, big oof. I danced, was fed caviar, had prosecco poured straight from the bottle into my mouth by a long-haired man-mountain of a chap, and avoided a 50-something couple. Imagine paying £220 to have some fucking sex with strangers, and they can't even afford champagne. Both first-timers who seemed keen to get me starkers. As the clock struck 10, the masks were ditched en masse and the playrooms opened. Cue an immediate surge of bodies racing upstairs to the maze of bedrooms, shedding clothes and grabbing condoms. This was carefree, bacchanalian bonking, as if the end of days were nigh. In the taxi home I felt stunned by the 10 in a bedism, but also strangely impressed by these libidinous hedonists confidently leaning into their desires and not giving a fig about society's norms. Yes, that is the best way to look at life. Society says I do something, if I do the opposite, that is good. Emma Saley had seen close up how British attitudes to sex and relationships have changed since she started the Killing Kittens parties in 2005. Back then, you had straight and gay and bisexual in the middle, she says, sipping Sauvignon Blanc at a Mayfair members club. If you were bi-curious or bisexual, that was a bit that was shocking. Whereas that's kind of just dull in the entire spectrum of what sexuality is now. Yes, I'm sure degrading sex has done wonders for the human race, because that is all you are doing. I mean, by all means, keep these parties going if you really want, but honestly, the people that go there, I can't imagine that they have happy lives. However, I just love how this article proves Peter Hitchens right a bit later on. Meanwhile, open relationships and polyamory are also becoming more mainstream, as well as shagathon television shows such as Industry, Bridgerton, Normal People and Sex/Life. There was Trigonometry, an 8-part drama on the BBC last year about a straight couple embarking on a triad relationship with their female lodger. More recently, The Love Triangle, a dire dating show on Channel 4, helped couples become thruples. Normalised through the telescreen. This is, according to Peter Hitchens, in The Abolition of Britain, pretty much exactly how a lot of cultural norms changed throughout the United Kingdom. How does this cultural landscape influence behaviour? I don't think people watch those shows and go, I'm going to become polyamorous now because I'm just that suggestible, but it does make people realise that it's an option, says Lister 40, who became polyamorous in her mid-30s following a bad breakup. See what I mean? It's like, oh, it's a coping mechanism? It seems like a coping mechanism, polyamory. And I don't know what goes on in these shows at all, but there's a chance that it is showing people that it's a good coping mechanism, which I really don't think it is. We're on this script that you meet somebody, settle down, and then this is the person for the rest of your life who's going to meet all your needs, financially, socially, sexually, emotionally, intellectually. And programs like that shift the dialogue. people wake up and realise it doesn't have to look like that. So what that screams to me is, before when she said, oh, people aren't very suggestible, they don't just watch these things and go, I'm going to become polyamorous now. Okay, technically that's true, but what it's saying, what she has just said there instead is that people watch these shows, go through a few extra steps, and then become polyamorous. Peter Hitchens was right, and I'm not saying ban these shows or don't make these shows or anything like that. But I am saying a natural reaction to seeing things like that on television should probably be closer to disgust than... Like, I mean, you can be intrigued all you want, but please stop assuming that television shows are real life. But I think the cherry on top for all this has to be this paragraph. In September, the actor Will Smith became a poster boy for an alternative relationship structure after talking about how he and his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, experimented with an open marriage. We have given each other trust and freedom, with the belief that everybody has to find their own way. And marriage for us can't be a prison, he told GQ magazine. I don't suggest this road for anybody. Love it. But the experiences, that's the freedom we've given one another and the unconditional support, to me, is the highest definition of love. This is the cope of a cuckold. She is your wife. She should be exclusively for you. Opening up the marriage is the sign that you are weak. But what I love about this is that they're saying, oh look, Will Smith and Jada Smith, look, they worked. There's a 4-minute video on YouTube taken from the Red Table Talks, which is what Jada Smith hosts, where they talk about the open relationship, and I mean, here's just some clips of Will Smith's reaction to her basically saying that she's cheating on him. It is just the video of a broken man. He is breaking down inside. It's literally the crying soy jack meme with the smug face over. It's ridiculous. Will Smith, get a better wife. Anyway, this article goes on forever. I'm going to read out one more paragraph and basically summarise some of the main other points, and then we're going to go, because I can only take so much degeneracy for one day. So, many will roll their eyes at the idea of an open relationship and polyamory, and notes that tiptoeing into opening up a relationship is often a sign that the couple have boarded the one-way train to Separationville. True. I've enjoyed meeting polyamory advocates on both sides of the Atlantic, but I couldn't help noticing that the vast majority grew up in divorced or single-parent families. It's a coping mechanism. They've witnessed the breakdown of the standard familial structure or suffered its consequences, and are understandably keen to build something different for themselves. That's it. It's literally a coping mechanism, and what makes me laugh is, you know, there's a lot of other waffle in this article, but she basically ends up concluding that polyamory is okay, but when children are in the mix, that's going to be really confusing for them and really bad for them. So she even basically admits herself that it's a really bad coping strategy, and before they have kids, she's okay with them exploring their sexuality, which I'm okay with it. I just think it's a really, really bad idea, but this article seems to be making out that it's no big deal to just, you know, make sex purely for pleasure. But that's not what it should be for. It should be an expression of love for the person you love. And if you take love out of sex, well, you're degrading sex, and then it's going to be quite hard to actually build a relationship with someone properly. So yeah, to conclude, polyamorous relationships seem to be the worst thing you can do to yourself, let alone to your relationship. It takes all meaning out of sex, and the more you do that, the less it is going to be meaningful to your significant other. Pure hedonism is clearly a terrible way to either cope with a big pandemic or just general anxiety or depression. And just because people have been hedonistic in the past isn't a very good reason to be hedonistic in the present. Polyamory just seems to be a thing exclusively for people with poor mental health, or for people with far too much time on their hands and not knowing how to fill it up. One girlfriend is enough for me. Why the hell would I want anyone else? And why in God's name would I risk my relationship with her just for maybe a bit of fun? No, I'm sorry, I take relationships far too seriously to try and risk them for something as hedonistic as having sex with a stranger. And that is how I encourage everyone else to look at relationships and look at sex. They are very important things, and they require strong foundations. And if you degrade sex to this meaningless, pleasure-seeking activity, then I'm afraid you're not going to make it. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. Sorry it was such a, let's say, a strange topic to put out just before Christmas, but I do hope you have a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, assuming that I don't make any videos or streams between now and New Year and Christmas. We're going to make it, friends. We just have to be good people. And luckily, being a good person, while it is very hard to do, if you play the long game, it means you're going to make it. Anyway, as usual, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and goodbye.